the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, WebRTC working group, right? He's got tremendous, deep experience dealing with real-time communications. He founded a successful voice over IP software client in the past, X10. I can let you do a little bit of intro, Eric. Hopefully you can hear me, right? Nod your head. Yes, please. Yeah, thank you. All right, well, with that, Eric, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks, Chad. Hey, thanks for having me here, and it looks like you have a great crowd. I'm joking, I can't see anyone, but I'll do my best to provide you guys with a bit of an update in terms of what's been going on here in the standards bodies. So just a quick introduction in terms of where this all started back in the spring of 2011, and even prior to that in the fall of 2010, there was some work being done in the IETF talking about how can we remove plugins from the typical voice over IP scenario where we have a piece of software getting in the way of real-time communications in browsers. And most of us recognize that in the form of some form of a Flash plugin or a completely standalone piece of software. So that's kind of where the whole WebRTC concept came from. And the Birds of a Feather meeting happened March 2011 at IETF 80 in Prague. And from there, it's been a pretty exciting ride. So this is the state of WebRTC today. The three different APIs that Chad was making mention of earlier are captured within two specific specifications that we refer to in the standards body and the working group specifically. Media capture is one, and then peer connection, which also includes data channel, is another. And so the first spec, media capture, went to last call for comments about, I think, 3 weeks ago. Could even be past that. So we're long into last call for media capture, which is great. It means that we're very close to ending that last call for comments and transitioning into candidate release. And that means that we can put that spec to bed for version 1 and make our way to full recommendation, which means that it's basically a ratified standard, which is a really great thing and something to be celebrated. So we're pretty happy about that. So really the only dangling items there's a reference permissions API that's really just processed at this point. There's a couple of other nits, but there's only a few issues remaining in the GitHub repo, and there's no outstanding pull requests. So that's kind of like a good measure of how close we are to closing that out. Peer connection and data channel are a bit different. There's still quite a few moving parts, but we are making some significant progress there. So we are hopeful, at least I am, in my humble opinion, are hopeful that we can close this specification out and these two APIs to allow for a candidate release this year. So there's a prediction for you. Hopefully, for everybody's sake, it comes true. Back in July of 2015, there was a bit of a recharter, which was at the tail end of another recharter within the WebRTC working group. In essence, what came out of that recharter was that we needed to find a way to encapsulate everything that was legacy, everything that the current vendors and stakeholders were interested in seeing WebRTC represent, also incorporate some of the future-looking methodologies. And that's kind of where my role came in terms of the working group. I came from the ORTC community group, and here's a snippet of the new charter as it's written. And basically, if we break it down, it basically says, hey, we're going to work towards making this more, web-friendly and incorporate more object-centric surfaces versus offer-answer exclusively. So I was asked to come over from the community group, which we founded in 2013 in the W3C, to join as a co-chair in the WebRTC working group and more as how can we leverage what they've done in the CG to add some oomph to what's happening in the working group. They were already doing fantastic work in the working group, but they knew they wanted to transition to more of this object model, and this kind of just harden that concept a little bit more. Soon after I joined, I managed to recruit one of my editors from the ORTC community group, Bernardo Boba, from Microsoft, and he's been doing a fantastic job in helping us move issues through the GitHub engine. And some of the things that have helped us more recently in the working group is moving towards more of a virtual interim model. Previously, it was more face-to-face and teleconference model. And recently, we've started kind of eating our own dog food. And it's been a little bit glitchy. And at times, it's been a bit difficult considering, sometimes we have over 30 members in a video conference, much like what we're doing now, which poses some problems. But that's okay, because it allows us to understand what we need to work on more. So it's all good, and we feel that we're making some good progress there. So the first virtual interim meeting was on January the 14th, and we talked a lot about ICE, simulcast, and the Pure Connection APIs, and made some good progress there. It was a productive meeting and kind of set the tone for the next version, or the next interim, I should say. So the next interim, it became very clear that there were some gaping holes, and that might be a little bit harsh, but there were some definite shortcomings in the way we were handling some of the internet connectivity establishment models, and that's where we focused all of our attention. And I'm very happy to say that meeting stopped short 30 minutes ahead of the projected agenda time and meeting time that we'd allotted for that. And I attribute that almost exclusively to the members' hard work and being prepared for that meeting. And we killed it. We nailed it, and we got a lot done and solved a lot of problems, which helped us kind of get even closer to, candidate release for Pure Connection. So here's kind of a snippet in terms of what WebRTC kind of looked like a couple of years ago. Everything was kind of Pure Connection based. And from a get user media perspective, you had the local media being captured, sent to the media stream with the media tracks, and then off to the Pure Connection APIs, and then off to the applications. And there was indirect control. You couldn't really gain access to anything directly. It was all through this SDP mechanism. So we did a lot of work in 2015. There was a boatload of objects added to WebRTC PC, I'm pretty proud of the amount of work that we've managed to get done. So what can you do with 1.0 objects? And there are objects in the 1.0 spec, which are kind of ORTC inspired, I believe, and this is kind of what you can do with those objects in the WebRTC 1.0 spec. Now, some of these aren't really shipping yet, but if you just bear with me, you'll understand from a methodology perspective what we can do with it. So warm up the media path, getting the track ready, and getting a track into and ringing. Change the send codec without having to deal with SDP, which is a beautiful thing. Change the camera source instantly front to back, which can be a bit of a headache previously. Enable disable sending of media instantly without signaling. Set max bit rate, max frame rate. And frame rate was added relatively recently. Obtain detailed status of ICE and DTLS transports, and send simulcast. So this is what WebRTC looks like today. So we still have our Pure Connection APIs, and we still have the objects, and now we have these objects below that are more exposed in the spec and defined in the spec, which looks a lot like the ORTC API that is now rather mature. So we still have the same objects in both, and now they're very closely defined. Before there was a bit of a disparity in terms of nomenclature and how they were referenced. Now we're getting much closer to actually talking about the same objects with the same names, which is nice and not as confusing. Here's what the architecture looks like in a bit more detail. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this because we don't have a lot of time, and frankly, I think if you're interested in this stuff, you'll probably want to take it up.
Yeah, and Eric, we will make the slides available for everyone afterwards too, if they really want to look.
Super. Thanks, Chad. So what can you do with ORTC but not WebRTC? Well, we can configure the objects without SDP and related complexities. So in the ORTC world, there's no SDP. If you want to use SDP in the ORTC sphere, it's entirely up to you. And there will be, I'd say, some decent JavaScript shims. Some of them are available already. And there'll be more available as time goes on that will allow you to do all the SDP munging you want to be compatible with backwards as you require legacy for backwards compatibility. Scalable video coding is a bit of a challenge in SDP world, and call forking is not really available. We do RTP unhandled events in ORTC land, and obviously interoperate with other ORTC endpoints directly without need for a shim. So when I'm speaking about ORTC in Edge, and as Chad mentioned, it's not a huge number of endpoints today, but there is a high likelihood that that will change. I think that we can hope that Microsoft will take that to the next level and have that kind of proliferate through their ecosystem. So here's a really quick example of the difference in some of the code as it relates to and spec as it relates to ORTC and WebRTC. Again, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this. In some cases, it's not really simplifying. It's providing more, deeper access to some of the knobs and switches. And then we have this new entrant, which kind of came on as part of the recharter of the working group. And it's a reference to WebRTC NV, which is essentially WebRTC next version. So what is next version? Well, it is basically meaning on the wire NV interoperability means we need to support the stuff that we used to support in 1.0. We have direct control and standalone operation where SDP is really not required. We must expose everything that goes into SDP, and we must have some backwards compatibility. So total footgun protection is really not required, meaning we can't cover all bases for all scenarios. And feature independence, no requirement to have SDP for everything. So that's pretty cool. And probably the next question that some of you are asking yourselves is like, okay, well, how does this NV thing differ from ORTC? If ORTC is all about objects and not really about SDP, how do they differ? So next version mandates support for 1.0 interoperability in some way, shape, or form with SDP or objects. The next question is, how long is it going to take to ratify that spec, considering we're not ready to ship 1.0 yet? And that's a pretty big question mark. Kind of hard to understand where we're going to be at the end of this, and I hope we end up shipping 1.0 soon. But there's a lot of people involved, a lot of opinions, so it might take longer than than anybody hopes. But and then there's ORTC, which is an objects-only API. It's not in a specifications track, meaning it's a community group, not a working group. So it's not. It can't really become a standard unless the community group merges with a working group, or the community group, forms its own working group, which is, in my mind, kind of counterproductive, and kind of goes against the grain in terms of, why I joined the community group or the working group, and why Bernard joined the working group from the community group. So the next question is, when is the ORTC API going to ship? Well, the good news is it's already shipping. Microsoft Edge shipped ORTC API in Edge, and they've made statements publicly about it coming to Skype for Web. I've actually seen this working, so I know that it's not too far off. And ORTC Library, which is a project that is near and dear to my heart. Hookflash has been working on this for a few years now. And this is an open source API, MIT Apache open source. And this will allow developers to build ORTC apps everywhere else except on Edge, right? Edge has its own APIs. And this will be really interesting for those developers that want to kind of not just interface with Edge, but also take advantage of some of those features that I was mentioning in reference to SVC and some more advanced controls in relation to having direct access to APIs sooner rather than later. Oh yeah, and WebRTC is also supported via JavaScript shim, as I was mentioning. So the next question is, where does that leave NV? Well, that's a good question. Both have objects in a standalone model. Both have support for SDP in some way or another. One is shipping today. And does that mean that NV will be, rendered irrelevant? I think the market will tell us that. Once ORTC sees some kind of adoption or not. I think the market will be the ultimate decider of that, and I'm looking forward to see what happens there. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this either. This is basically just capturing, what's in the lib. It's a C++ API. It's focused on mobile first. It wraps for Objective-C, C#, and Java. It's focused more on Windows RT, iOS, Mac, and Android, and uses lower-level WebRTC media components at the core. And here's another kind of like an architectural diagram so that you could compare kind of, to what the spec looks like and what the library looks like. So in summary, the working group and the community group are converging. The chairs, the charter, and the editors. The specs are also converging. We see a lot of objects in 1.0 now and more as time goes on. Even in the last interim meeting, we saw a lot of definition overlap between ICE, which was great. We're seeing ORTC and Edge. We're seeing the library coming along very nicely. I expect that's going to ship likely in Q3 of this year. And we're seeing peer connection implementation in JS by way of adapter.js. We're also seeing Google make reference to ORTC, and some of the objects like RTP sender receiver are already available, albeit obscure, at webrtc.org. And they're saying more come in 2016 for Chrome, Android, and iOS, which is fantastic. And that's all I got. I just want to say thank you to Bernard and Peter and Robin for helping me out with a bit of the content. And thanks for the organizers for putting this on. Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. So this is a really great opportunity to talk to one of the guys who's actually driving the standards and where WebRTC is going. Erik, can you switch to your video? We can take a couple, one or two questions if there's any out there. Is it too early? Not enough beer yet? Anybody? All right.
Can somebody hand me a beer?
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe one question for you, Erik, is you covered a little bit, but maybe you can mention it again. When do you think the current specification will really be standardized, and does that even matter? Talking about the get user media spec and the peer connection spec too.
Yeah, I mean, get user media is so close to making it to Canada release already. I think in my mind that's already shipping, and I think in many people's minds, the definition of shipping is more or less how many endpoints support that API already. And I think some of the remarks you made previously, Chad, we already see billions of endpoints using WebRTC, and the fact that there's these two flavors of the same thing and they're kind of converging tells me that everybody wants this to really work and everybody wants to see this really go the distance. So in terms of actual candidate release dates, I'd be surprised if Get User Media doesn't ship in candidate release form, you know, if it doesn't ship before or by the end of this quarter, meaning by the end of March, I'd be relatively surprised. From a pure connection perspective, I think that's going to take a bit more work, but I'm hopeful that that will ship before fall. I could be wrong. That could be a little bit, you know, I might be reaching a little bit, but I'm hopeful that that is the case.
Great. All right. Thanks again, Erik.
Great.
It was really great.
Thanks, guys.